This panel is going to explore how nature, forest, oceans, biodiversity, and even atmospheric systems can become core drivers of the next global economy through tokenization. By assigning measurable tradable value to RWNA, nations can unlock development finance, catalyze conservation, and build sovereign digital economies rooted in ecological integrity. Drawing from the Beyond GDP agenda and DBRP's vision for asset-based economic resilience, I'd like to welcome our esteemed panelists today, including Juan Carlos Monterrey Gomez, Special Climate Representative for Panama, Mr. Glenn Gaffney from G2 Solutions and a 31-year veteran of the CIA, and Mr. Kwasi Asare, one of our leading family offices and a member of the Ashanti royal family. And today we will be discussing how to ethically define, price, govern, and trade nature-based assets while integrating geospatial data and future financing technologies. So, gentlemen. Thank you for joining me, gentlemen. Juan, I'd love to start with you, sir. How can nations like Panama, with pristine ecological assets, use RWNA to create new economic models without compromising environmental integrity?
Thank you so much, Laurence, for the opportunity. First of all, I just want to think a little bit more about the remarks from Dr. Leon, because ultimately what we need and ultimately what our job is this year is to be able to align the global financial and economic system with the objective of decarbonization and building resilience. That is literally the topic on the agenda. So what the tokenization of digital assets allows us to do is to fast track that connection between the conservation and the finance that we need through the traceability to ensure that these assets are being managed properly. So for example, we need to rethink GDP, as Dr. Leon mentioned. If you look at a watershed, let's say you go to the upper side of the watershed and you put a mine at the upper side of the watershed. You extract a bunch of minerals, you destruct all the forests, and GDP goes up. It goes up by 10%. You come down the watershed, you keep cutting the trees, you keep destroying the forest to do some, grazing of animals, and GDP keeps growing. Now the rainy season starts, there is a massive flood, and then the people that live in the lower side of the watershed are now completely flooded because the forests disappear. How can GDP go up while at the same time we're setting for failure the communities that are part of the society and the economy that allegedly is being benefited by that increase in GDP? So that's the mindset that we need to change. And I say mindset because all of this is a social construct. We invented all of this. And the only reason why we believe in these formulas is because we believe in them. That's it. Because someone put it in our minds to believe it. So we can do the same to rethink it. And that's what we need in order to be able to get these, natural assets to be valued at the right price or the right value, but also to be able for them to be traced in a way that will help us to raise the capital to continue protecting them. So that was a long answer to what I wanted to say. So basically, we just need to rethink, how we measure economic output. And I think, the tokenization of these natural assets is the bridge that will help us with the transparency and the finance that we need.
I love that answer. And as long as we have gentlemen like yourself and Dr. Leon acting as both sides of the bridge, I actually think we have a chance to actually be successful at this. So, thank you, sir. Glenn, let's shift a little bit over to the other side. What does it take institutionally to build a trusted, interoperable system for valuing RWNA?
Thank you, Laurence. Two things occur to me, and I'll answer your question. One is, thank you, Leon, for the keynote address. It was fantastic. I couldn't help but think of two things. One, we just celebrated Easter. And what kept going through my head was, if you look at what it says about Easter Sunday in the Gospels, the women show up at the tomb and an angel says, "Why are you looking for the living among the dead?" And that's really the baseline that we have to shift. I spent a lot of my career putting everything that I had into investing in the preservation of freedom. But you are not really free if the thing that you pursue ends up killing you in the end. And so this is about true freedom. We're the ones who assigned value to a dead fish. We can assign value to other things. So as Sergio asked me to think about this, I thought about setting this up in a construct of 3 data classes. One class being the pristine resources that are in natural balance. And my friend and partner here has one of the best examples of that in the mangroves in Panama, as an example. If we think about the value and what we think about in terms of value of that system, we think of it in terms of the value of the data in the study, in the development choices we are going to make, what that trade space looks like, in the modeling, right, of what all those mangroves do for the ecosystems around it. And we can measure the growth and the change of that, right, in those other ecosystems. Look at the value of protecting it and look at the derivative value into the existing economy. That's the first class, and it's the smallest class, unfortunately, the pristine class, so it should be the most valuable class. And that value actually gains value because it connects to the other 2 classes. The second class of assets are the ones that are recovering, both naturally and augmented. All right, and so by augmented, I mean, like my son was doing research on what's the best natural vegetation to put given the soil content after a massive forest fire, because it's the ground cover that actually enables the forest to come back. And if you put the right plants in, given where the soil is after a fire, the trees will come back faster. That's an augmented natural solution in that space, right, as an example. And so the natural and the augmented hold independent value, and they also hold collective value, like the pristine part. And if shared globally, there's even an increased value in that space, right? So now you can do comparative modeling of the recovery against the pristine value in the modeling that you just looked at in the first class. You can do outcome tracking about how do we see this asset in its development in all the ways that it provides value across the physical systems and the physical value transition, as well as the earned value, or the what I call the ethereal value, right, in other ecosystems. You can look at efficiency trades. Is it worth turning this into paper? Is it worth turning this into fuel? You can look at then that derivative value in the future economy. And that future economy is an important piece, because once you set the value and it's recovering, now you are investing in future value. And that's the essence of any futures market. Well, last piece. The third class is, unfortunately, one of the biggest classes, which is depleted basis. All right, so you've got pristine basis, recovering basis, depleted basis. You need to do modeling from the class 1 and the class 2 data to understand what you have and how you want to recover and where you're going. You want to enable digital investment in futures. Think about a futures market that's tokenized, that looks at that value and projects what the long-term value might be. And as we begin to trade in that value chain, we create a better understanding of value across the board and further investment to how we want to recover from those depleted bases. It turns into efficiency on that recovery, time to return on investment, projected value, and then further derivative value going forward.
That was fantastic. Thank you, Glenn. So Kwasi, let's take this from the entrepreneur standpoint. Right. How can emerging creators, local communities, entrepreneurs become the stakeholders, not just the subjects? Like, how do you become the stakeholders, not just the subjects of the tokenized environmental assets? What's your take?
Yeah, well, thank you guys for having me on the stage. It's always a pleasure to be a part of Public Foundation's events. Shout out to all the VIPs in the room. And of course to Trammell for hosting this amazing week. Over the course of my career, I've seen, entrepreneurs take a lead role in companies like Tidal. Even MySpace was owned by Justin Timberlake at one point. I think today you see an opportunity with platforms like TuneFM and others where Web3 is enabling entrepreneurs to actually have ownership of platforms, of allowing artists to actually own their data, to own their content, unlike social networks of the past where, unfortunately the platforms own the majority of the content, the advertising revenue, and ultimately the proceeds of those platforms. Today you have an opportunity to actually upload your assets to a platform, track those assets using blockchain, and actually see the royalties globally that will return from those assets. That's unprecedented. For anyone who owns music out there, that your music might be getting played in Thailand or some foreign market. You would have no idea unless you had someone actually doing forensic accounting in those markets. And so with blockchain, you actually have an opportunity from the inception of your relationship with whatever platform to actually have real-time reporting, real-time data, and actually real-time royalties, which is, again, unprecedented. And I think entrepreneurs, artists, creators are actually stepping into lead roles and investing in platforms. I mean, there's many funds today that are driven by athletes or by musicians that are investing in all kinds of platforms, not just media content platforms. But certainly those people have outside advantage, the opportunity to actually bring these platforms to a wide scope. For example, TuneFM, we just partnered. It's a company where I've been running artist relations for the past couple years, and we just partnered with Snoop Dogg. And so Snoop Dogg now is a stakeholder in this company. And so, of course, he's going to be able to bring other artists onto the platform. It's super exciting for an artist like that to step into an ownership role. It's obviously something other artists are going to see and be like, yes, I want to be a part of that. And frankly, he wasn't getting the return that he hoped for on Spotify. Famously, he had 1 billion streams one month on Spotify and only received $45,000 in royalties. You do the math, it's like not that great. On TuneFM, that same number of streams would have actually given him about $4.5 million. So you can understand why an artist like that wants to make the move. And again, he's stepping into a leadership role in the company, not just as like another artist on the platform.
Fantastic. So I know these. I wish we had about an hour to talk on these panels. JC, frameworks and safeguards. What's most needed at the multilateral level, like from your perspective, to help ensure the equity and the sovereignty of those nature-based assets? How do we make sure that happens?
What we need is the most boring thing: global standards. And to get to global standards, we need to engage in very long and boring conversations on how we develop methodologies that we can all abide with. And on top of that, we need to do a lot of conscious awakening and capacity development, because the environmental issues themselves are complicated. And now when we're trying to throw the tokenization, digitalization, traceability of all of that, gets even more complicated. So governments, we are short-staffed. We are putting out fires every day from so many different fronts. So the development of capacities at the institutional level in governments and the inclusion of different actors, specifically indigenous peoples on the nature side who have been the stewards of the land and of the oceans, is of utmost importance. So in short, we need to sit down and develop global standards. We need to heighten the capacity of governments, and we need to make sure that all actors are included. And that's why the DAC is so important, to get this movement going, to set up these standards so that we can all know what we're engaging in.
Thank you. Glenn, a quick follow-up on that.
Yeah, so I think as AI continues to mature in the market space, it's going to drive a change from what we now refer to as the data economy to a knowledge economy. And I think that's an important part here that's going to help us, because the art of this is not going to be about just having the data. It's about how you act on the knowledge that is generated by questioning the data appropriately. So the data's value grows based on your ability to action that data. And so understanding what those trades are is a first step. Understanding the importance of what's happening with Panama's mangroves is critical to understanding how we want Florida's mangroves to recover. And so his pristine data set has value but it's got value if we can action it and provide value globally in this space. And so when we start thinking in terms of quality of decision making, right, as opposed to just quantity of stuff, right, we change the way that we think about the whole ecosystem. And then you have to have the geospatial infrastructure for data and the data collection and the data, all those boring things, right? But you have to have that. But there's an incentive to have those things because we're now talking about the value of action, not just the value that I can further monetize a profit margin because I've held on to this data for so long.
That's great. You know, Kwasi is as the proverbial entrepreneur and the private sector, representing the private sector, right? When we're talking about real world natural assets. I mean, you're up here, you know, with Juan Carlos from Panama and Glenn from an institution like, you know, like the CIA formally, right? How do we basically, formally, how we basically, you know, what do you want to see? Like, how do we basically make that bridge? We keep hearing, and that's a big theme about today in terms of the bridge. Is like, how do we basically make that bridge between you, the capital, the entrepreneurs, and the countries?
I love that question. One of my passion projects right now is a project called 2050 House, where we seek to do exactly that, bring together cultural leaders, diplomats, entrepreneurs, investors, into forums like this to be able to actually connect to one another. And over the course of, say, 2 or 3 days, there's a series of conversations, there's a series of performances, there's farm-to-table dinners, and we have these shared experiences. We learn from each other, and actually by the end of the week, you're walking out of there with not just a stack of business cards, but actually real relationships at the highest level that you can use as actionable things across verticals to actually advance these situations. None of these, unfortunately, none of the policy that we're talking about is going to reach the masses without culture, right? Without a vehicle to enable these ideas to get out of this room, we're not going to be able to actually move the needle on any of this stuff. And so culture is going to play a huge part in our ability to provide resilience for humanity going forward.
Fantastic. All right, so last words. Kwasi, you first, last word.
Just thank you guys for another amazing FOSD event, and looking forward to Panama and Anga.
Awesome. Juan Carlos.
Do the boring stuff. That's the most important part to get this ball rolling. And we need capacity, we need finance, and we need more support for that.
Fantastic. Glenn, bring us home.
Do the boring stuff, but tell a story that can't be ignored by the value of having already done the boring stuff. If we go out there and try to get people just to invest in doing boring, guess what? We'll be right back here next year. And so unless we actually start, it doesn't have to be perfect. We just need to start. Mm-hmm. And so assign a value. It doesn't matter, right? Call it jigadingles, I don't care. Assign a value, right? And we can think about micro jigadingles and all those kinds of things. but what happens is you begin to set a baseline for a story that says, this is how we are assigning value. And as soon as you do that, the tokenization group, right, will be there like that because they're waiting for it, right? And then this thing takes off and we've got a tiger by the tail.
Hey, Gene, we figured it out. The value of the assets is the micro jingle dingle. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, panelists. Appreciate it.